The number that blew up Boston's dream. Giannis Antetokounmpo was almost a Boston Celtic. Not in some fake rumor, not in some wild fan fantasy, not in one of those late night trade machine posts that disappears by morning. This was real. The framework was there. The names were on the table. The league was watching, and for a moment, Boston was standing inches away from pairing Jayson Tatum with one of the most dominant forces the NBA has ever seen. Then everything collapsed. And the craziest part is this. Giannis did not walk away because he hated Boston. He did not reject the Celtics because he doubted Tatum. He did not say no because of the fans, the pressure, the weather, or the weight of those banners hanging above the Garden. According to the storm of reports that followed, the entire dream may have cracked over one thing: the contract number. Boston wanted control. Giannis wanted commitment. The Celtics were reportedly comfortable with a shorter extension, while Giannis wanted the full long-term superstar treatment. And when the two sides could not close that gap, the door to Boston started shutting fast. That is what makes this story so brutal for Celtics fans. This was not just about missing out on another All-Star. This was Giannis, a two-time MVP, a Finals MVP, a champion, a player who could have walked into Boston and instantly changed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. But instead of a green jersey, he ended up choosing Miami. And Boston was left staring at the wreckage, because this failed pursuit did not just cost them Giannis. It dragged Jaylen Brown into the center of the storm. Brown, the Finals MVP, the homegrown star, the player who helped deliver a championship, suddenly became the price Boston was willing to pay for a bigger dream. And once that dream died, the damage did not disappear. It spread. Now Brad Stevens is under fire. Celtics fans are furious. Jaylen Brown is gone. Giannis is in South Beach. And the franchise that thought it was chasing a dynasty is now being forced to answer one terrifying question. Did Boston just destroy its own future over a deal it should have finished? Before we go deeper, tell me where you're watching from right now. If you believe Boston made a franchise-changing mistake, comment 1. If you think Miami simply had the better plan, comment 2. And if you want more NBA drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes stories like this, make sure you subscribe, because this story is only getting started. Why Giannis started looking for the exit? To understand why Giannis Antetokounmpo was willing to listen to Boston at all, you have to go back to Milwaukee. Because this was never just a sudden trade rumor. This was not Giannis waking up one morning and deciding he wanted a new jersey, a bigger market, or a louder spotlight. That has never really been his style. Giannis built his entire NBA identity around loyalty, patience, and proving that a superstar could win without running to the easiest situation. He gave Milwaukee everything. He gave them 13 seasons. He gave them MVP-level dominance. He gave them a championship. He gave them one of the greatest playoff runs in franchise history. He became the face of the organization, the player who turned the Bucks from a good story into a real NBA power. But loyalty has a limit when the future starts looking smaller every year. After that championship season, Milwaukee slowly began to lose the edge that made them terrifying. Injuries hit, role players changed, coaching decisions became unstable. The Eastern Conference got younger, faster, and deeper, while the Bucks kept trying to stretch one more run out of a core that no longer felt bulletproof. Giannis could feel it. The front office kept promising that the window was still open. The fans wanted to believe another banner was coming, but inside the reality of the season, the signs were everywhere. The roster did not have the same force. The defense did not feel as scary. The offense depended too much on Giannis forcing miracles through walls of defenders. Then came the injuries around him. Then came the playoff disappointments. Then came the painful realization that every year of his prime was becoming more expensive, more fragile, and harder to protect. For a player like Giannis, that matters. He is not chasing empty headlines. He is chasing winning. He is chasing legacy. He knows that history does not remember excuses the same way it remembers championships. And as Milwaukee kept slipping, Giannis started asking the one question no franchise wants its superstar to ask. Can I still win here? Once that question enters the room, everything changes. Because now every conversation becomes bigger. Every roster move gets judged harder. Every loss feels like evidence. Every promise from the front office sounds less convincing than the last one. That was the beginning of the real story. Not Boston, not Miami, not the contract number. The real story started when Giannis looked at Milwaukee and quietly realized that the franchise he had carried for more than a decade might no longer be able to carry him back to the top. The Knicks' dream that never became real. Before Boston became the headline, and before Miami became the final answer, there was another team sitting in the background. New York. For a moment, the Knicks looked like the dream that made the most emotional sense. Madison Square Garden, a hungry fan base, a city desperate for a true championship-level superstar, a team with toughness, defense, and enough national attention to turn Giannis into the center of the basketball universe overnight. And according to the story around the league, Giannis had interest. That alone should tell you how serious his doubts about Milwaukee had become. This was not a player casually listening to rumor. This was a superstar thinking carefully about where the next phase of his career could actually work. New York had the energy. The Knicks had been building something real. They had a culture that valued physicality, pressure, and playoff basketball. In many ways, Giannis would have fit the city perfectly. He plays with force, he plays with pride. He plays like every possession is personal. The Garden would have loved him. But loving the idea of a trade and actually completing one are two very different things. For Milwaukee, moving Giannis was not like trading a normal star. This was the face of the franchise, the greatest player in Bucks history. A champion. A symbol. If they were going to send him away, they needed a return that protected the next decade. Picks, young talent, salary structure, flexibility, and a clear path forward. New York never truly pushed the deal across the line. Maybe the price was too high. Maybe Milwaukee did not like the structure. Maybe the Knicks did not want to empty the entire future for one move, even if that one move was Giannis. Whatever the reason, the dream never became real, and that failure mattered. Because when a superstar's first preferred path is not open, the next options become more serious. The search becomes sharper. The leverage becomes clearer. Giannis was no longer just wondering what life after Milwaukee could look like. He was beginning to understand how complicated it would be to actually escape. That is where Boston entered the picture. The Celtics were not just another team with interest. They were a winning machine with a championship identity, a superstar in Jayson Tatum, and a front office aggressive enough to think big. On paper, Boston could offer Giannis something New York could not guarantee immediately, a real chance to dominate the East. But paper does not win negotiations. And as the Knicks faded into the background, Boston stepped forward with a pitch that looked powerful enough to change everything. The only problem was that every powerful pitch has a price. For Boston, that price had a name. Jaylen Brown. Boston enters the race. At first, people around the league did not fully believe Boston was serious. It sounded too bold, too complicated, too dangerous. The Celtics had already built a championship-level identity. They had Tatum, they had Brown. They had continuity, defensive toughness, playoff experience, and the kind of roster most teams spend years trying to create. So why would they risk blowing it up? That was the question. But behind closed doors, Boston was not thinking like a team satisfied with being good. They were thinking like a franchise chasing something bigger. Not one title, not one run, not one lucky season. They were thinking dynasty. And in the NBA, dynasty thinking leads to uncomfortable conversations. If Giannis Antetokounmpo becomes available, every serious franchise has to ask the same question. What are we willing to sacrifice to get him? For Boston, the answer was painful. Jaylen Brown. The moment his name entered the conversation, everything changed. This was not some weak offer built around role players and protected picks. This was a star-for-star concept. Brown was not just an all-star. He was a finals MVP, a two-way wing, a homegrown Celtic, a player who had already survived criticism, playoff pressure, and national doubt. Putting him on the table meant Boston was serious. It also meant Boston was playing with fire, because once a player like Jaylen Brown learns that his name is being used in trade talks, the relationship is never exactly the same. Even if the trade does not happen, the damage can still remain. Trust gets shaken. Loyalty feels different. Every public quote starts sounding carefully measured. But Boston seemed willing to take that risk because the reward was almost impossible to ignore. Imagine Giannis with Tatum, one of the most physically dominant players in NBA history, next to one of the smoothest elite scorers in the league. Giannis attacking downhill. Tatum creating from the wing. Boston's defense getting bigger, stronger, nastier. The Celtics turning every playoff series into a nightmare of length, power, and pressure. That vision was intoxicating, and for a brief moment, it felt possible. Reports began shifting. Suddenly, Boston was not just a rumor. They had a real shot. Milwaukee was listening. The framework was alive. The league started paying attention because the Celtics had done something few teams could do. They put a real star on the table. But Milwaukee was not only looking for star power, they were looking for control. They wanted young players, they wanted picks, they wanted future flexibility. They wanted to make sure that if they lost Giannis, they would not wake up 1 year later trapped with another star who might eventually want out. That is where Boston's offer started to look less perfect. Brown gave them the biggest name, but Miami was building something different, something deeper, something safer for a rebuilding franchise. And while Boston fans were dreaming about Giannis in green, Miami was quietly building the kind of package that front offices take very seriously. Jaylen Brown becomes the price of the dream. This is where the story turns from business into emotion, because for fans, trade packages are easy to talk about. You say a name, add some picks, imagine a new lineup, and move on. But inside a locker room, inside a franchise, inside a player's life, it is never that simple. Jaylen Brown was not just a trade asset. He was part of Boston's soul. He had grown up in that jersey. He had taken the criticism. He had heard the doubts about his handle, his decision-making, his fit next to Jayson Tatum. He had watched people question whether the Celtics could ever win with both of them as the faces of the team. Then he proved them wrong. Brown became stronger, sharper, more complete. He defended elite wings. He attacked the rim with force. He embraced pressure. And when the biggest stage arrived, he did not disappear. He delivered. He became a Finals MVP and helped bring a championship back to Boston. That should have made him untouchable. But in the NBA, almost nobody is truly untouchable when Giannis is on the other side of the conversation. That is the cold truth. Boston looked at Brown and saw greatness, but they looked at Giannis and saw a chance to raise the ceiling even higher. That is a brutal reality for any player to absorb. You can win, you can lead, you can bring a banner, and still, one summer later, your name can end up in a trade framework because the league never stops chasing the next bigger thing. For Brown, that had to hit hard. Imagine helping deliver exactly what a franchise asked from you, only to discover that your reward might be becoming the centerpiece of someone else's arrival. That is not just basketball strategy. That is personal, and that is why Boston's pursuit of Giannis created a problem even before the deal collapsed. If the Celtics landed Giannis, Brown was gone. If the Celtics missed Giannis, Brown still knew what had happened. Either way, something had changed. This is the hidden cost of superstar hunting. Front offices love to talk about flexibility, assets, windows, and timelines. But players remember. They remember when their names come up. They remember who protected them and who quietly explored moving them. They remember whether they were treated like a cornerstone or like currency. Jaylen Brown had every reason to feel blindsided. And once Giannis chose Miami, Boston still had to deal with the emotional wreckage left behind. The franchise had chased a bigger superstar, exposed its willingness to move a Finals MVP, and then failed to complete the move. That is the nightmare scenario, because now you do not just miss the target. You also damaged the relationship with the player you were willing to sacrifice. And for Boston, that damage would soon become impossible to ignore. Miami's quiet power move. While Boston created the loudest headlines, Miami made the smarter, quieter move. The Heat did not need to win the rumor cycle. They needed to give Milwaukee something Boston could not fully offer: control, youth, draft picks, and a cleaner rebuilding path. Boston's package had the bigger name in Jaylen Brown. That was powerful. Brown was a proven star, a Finals MVP, and someone who could keep the Bucks competitive right away. But Milwaukee had to ask a painful question. If Jaylen Brown came to a rebuilding Bucks team, would he really want to stay long term? That risk mattered. Miami's offer looked different. It was not built around one major star. It was built around multiple young players, future picks, and flexible contracts. For a franchise losing Giannis, that kind of package offered breathing room. It allowed Milwaukee to reset instead of jumping into another complicated superstar situation. And that is where Miami's advantage became clear. The Heat were not just offering assets, they were offering certainty. They had a culture built on toughness, commitment, and total belief in star players. For Giannis, that mattered. After years of watching Milwaukee decline around him, he wanted to know his next team was fully committed. Boston seemed caught between ambition and hesitation. They wanted Giannis, but not at any cost. They wanted the dream, but not the full risk. Miami did not hesitate the same way, and in a superstar race, hesitation can be fatal. By the time Boston realized how serious Miami's position was, the Heat were no longer just the backup option. They were the team with the clearer plan, the contract number that broke Boston. This is where the entire story became explosive. After all the rumors, trade packages, and debates, the real issue became simple. How much was Boston willing to commit to Giannis? In the NBA, money is never just money. For a superstar, a contract is a message. It tells the player whether a franchise sees him as a temporary gamble or as the future of the entire organization. Giannis reportedly wanted 3 years at 35% of the cap. Boston was linked to a shorter, smaller offer, and that gap became the center of the drama. From Giannis's point of view, the demand made sense. He was a two-time MVP, a finals MVP, a champion, and one of the most dominant players of his generation. He was not asking to be treated like a mystery. He was asking to be treated like Giannis Antetokounmpo. The biggest question was obvious. If Boston had already been willing to pay Jaylen Brown like a 35% cap superstar, why would Giannis accept less? That is where pride, respect, and leverage collided. Giannis had already spent years carrying Milwaukee through uncertainty. He was not going to enter another situation without full commitment. He wanted security. He wanted belief. He wanted proof that Boston was truly all in. When that proof did not clearly arrive, he waited. And while he waited, Miami stayed alive. Those few days changed everything. Boston got close enough to imagine Giannis in green, but not close enough to finish the deal. And in the NBA, almost does not matter. Conflicting reports and the blame game. Once Giannis chose Miami, the blame game exploded. One version said Boston lost him because the Celtics refused to meet his contract demand. That version made the front office look cheap, hesitant, and afraid to fully commit after already putting Jaylen Brown on the table. For Celtics fans, that was painful to hear. How do you chase a two-time MVP, risk your relationship with a finals MVP, and then stop short over the final contract number? But then another version appeared. Some reports pushed back and claimed Boston was actually prepared to offer Giannis the full extension he wanted. Under that version, the Celtics did not lose because they lowballed him. They lost because Milwaukee preferred Miami's package of young players, picks, and future control. So the story split in two. Was Boston too cautious, or did Milwaukee simply choose Miami's asset? Either way, the result did not change. Giannis went to the Heat, Boston lost the superstar race, Jaylen Brown's name had already been dragged into trade talks, and the Celtics fan base was left trying to figure out who deserved the blame. That uncertainty made everything worse, because when a team misses a star, fans want answers. But when there are two different explanations, the frustration only grows. Every report becomes a weapon, every rumor becomes another reason to argue. And for Boston, the damage was already real. Even if the Celtics did not make the worst mistake, they still failed to land Giannis. They still exposed Jaylen Brown as trade bait. They still walked away from the biggest sweepstakes of the offseason with nothing but questions. In the NBA, perception can hurt almost as much as reality. Boston loses more than Giannis. When Giannis gave Miami the green light, Boston did not just lose a player. They lost control of the story. For days, Celtics fans imagined a future with Giannis and Tatum together. The East would have changed overnight. Boston would have become bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than almost any team in the league. Then the dream disappeared, and the situation got worse when Jaylen Brown, the player Boston had been willing to sacrifice for Giannis, was moved in another deal. That is what made the saga so brutal. If Boston had missed on Giannis but kept Brown, maybe the relationship could have been repaired. It would have been awkward, but winning can heal a lot. Instead, Brown was gone. A homegrown star. A finals MVP, a player who helped bring Boston a championship. Suddenly, he became both the price of the dream and the casualty of its collapse. That left Brad Stevens facing serious backlash. Fans started asking hard questions. Did Boston misread the market? Did they underestimate Miami? Did they damage Brown's trust too early? Did they chase Giannis without being fully ready to pay the cost? Those questions will follow the Celtics. Every Boston loss will bring the story back. Every Giannis highlight in Miami will sting. Every Jaylen Brown big game somewhere else will remind fans of what was lost. That is the danger of a failed superstar chase. You do not just miss the player you wanted. Sometimes, you damage the foundation you already had. Now Boston has to prove the future it chose is worth everything it gave up. The lesson behind the collapse. The Giannis Celtics collapse is bigger than one failed trade. It is a lesson about how fragile power really is in the modern NBA. On paper, front offices control the contracts, they hold the picks, they build the offers, they talk to other teams, they decide which players are available and which direction the franchise should go, but the truth is more complicated. Superstars have power too. Giannis had power because he was elite. He had power because he had given Milwaukee more than a decade of loyalty. He had power because he was close enough to free agency that teams had to care where he actually wanted to be. No franchise wanted to surrender its future for a superstar who might walk away. That leverage changed everything. Milwaukee had to think about the next era. Miami had to prove it was fully committed. Boston had to decide how much risk it could stomach. And Giannis had to protect the years of his career he can never get back. That is the strategic lesson. In today's NBA, talent is only one part of the equation. Timing matters, contract structure matters, trust matters, communication matters. If one piece is wrong, even the most exciting trade idea can fall apart in hours. Boston may have had the star package. Miami had the clearer future package. Giannis had the personal leverage. Milwaukee had the final decision, and Jaylen Brown became the human cost of a chase that never reached the finish line. That is the part every franchise should remember. Players are not chess pieces without emotion. They hear the rumors. They understand the business. They know when they are valued and when they are being used as a path to someone else. A great organization can make hard decisions, but it must also handle people with honesty and respect, because culture is not just what a team says when it wins. Culture is what a team protects when the decisions get uncomfortable. For Giannis, the move to Miami represents a fresh challenge. He gets a new city, a new partner in Bam Adebayo, a new organization, and another chance to chase a championship without feeling trapped by a fading situation. For Milwaukee, the pain of losing a legend comes with the responsibility of building something real from the assets they receive. For Boston, the challenge is deeper. The Celtics now have to rebuild trust, reshape identity, and prove that losing Giannis and Jaylen Brown in the same storm was not the beginning of a long regret. Maybe Boston finds a way forward. Maybe Tatum and the new roster create a different kind of contender. Maybe Brad Stevens turns criticism into another bold move. But this story will not disappear quickly, because every time Giannis dominates in Miami, Celtics fans will remember how close he came to Boston. Every time Jaylen Brown shines somewhere else, they will remember what he meant in green. And every time Boston falls short, one question will come back. Did they make the right choice? That is what makes this saga so powerful. It is not just about contracts, trades, and rumors. It is about ambition. It is about loyalty. It is about knowing when to chase something bigger and when to protect what you already have. And sometimes, the hardest lesson in basketball is the simplest one. You can be close to greatness and still lose everything if you hesitate at the wrong moment. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe for more NBA drama, trade stories, and behind-the-scenes analysis. Like the video if you think this was one of the biggest what-if moments in Celtics history, share it with another NBA fan, and comment 1 if you believe Boston made a massive mistake, or 2 if you think Miami simply played the game better.